Bitches keep coming up short, fucking with too short. Too short.
Hey, what's up everyone? Today I want to discuss how to get strong with hard exercises. So this is something that I've been thinking about lately, and I guess you have a lot of people who go into the gym and you see them constantly maxing out on assistance exercises or, exercises that don't necessarily have as big of a carryover to their main lifts. And in this context, I'm just talking about getting stronger here. So what exactly do I mean by a hard exercise? I'm defining this in the context of this video as an exercise that will decrease or increase training load while having a large carryover to one of the three power lifts. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can go on to the rack, set the pins so that the bar needs to move about an inch to lock out and allow you to lock that out, and then you're going to be YouTube famous because you're doing a rack dead with 1,000 pounds. No one gives a shit. So what I'm referring to specifically are deficits and overload. So obviously when I'm talking about a deficit, I'm talking about causing a disadvantage, impairment, or a handicap to your lift. So that would be, for instance, like a deficit deadlift. Say you're a conventional puller and you pull off of a deficit, i.e. you stand on something. You're not going to be able to pull the same amount as if you were pulling off the floor. So that's what a deficit is. And with overload, obviously that means you're basically putting you're using an excessive load from what you're used to. So using a slingshot would be an example of overload. So what are a couple specific exercises for the big three that, in my opinion, are highly effective at accomplishing the goals of increasing your big power lifts by using a deficit or overload? Like for deadlifting, honestly, lifting off of a deficit and block pulls are my absolute favorites. Lifting off a deficit, it's pretty standard. I mean, you're increasing the range of motion. You're going to be, especially for conventional pullers who are really strong off the bottom, it kind of allows you to get even stronger off the bottom and teach you to accelerate through the lockout. As a sumo deadlifter, it's kind of hard to do deficit deads in a sumo position just because it depends on what kind of platform you have. With the conventional deadlift, you can stand on a plate and you're good. Whereas with the sumo, you have to stand on two plates, and because your feet not only push down but they push out, it could be kind of dangerous. You can cause yourself to do the splits, etc. in training, which obviously isn't cool and not something that you want to do. So for me, as a sumo deadlifter, I actually like doing deficit stiff-legged deadlifts and deficit conventional deadlifts in my training, and I find that has really good carryover to my sumo deadlift. And then in terms of causing overloads for deadlifts, there's basically two main things you can do. Well, there's more, but the ones that I like the most are to pull off blocks, and then there's rack pulls, and then there's obviously things you can do like reverse bands and stuff like that. Personally, I think bands definitely have a place in some people's lifts, but you can get so strong without any bands that I don't really see a point in using them. The reason I prefer the block deadlift over the deficit deadlift, the reason I prefer the block deadlift over the rack pull is, for the majority of people who don't have like a crazy good rack, the safety pins only go down a certain height. So what that means is that you can only set the bar down to a specific height that probably isn't low enough to have a large carryover to your regular deadlift. So there's ways of getting around that. For instance, you can stand on something. Like for me, when I first started sumo deadlifting, what I did was I started I started in a rack, and I would elevate my platform. So I started just standing on like an aerobic step, and then I started adding steps underneath that aerobic step until eventually pulling off the rack was the bar in terms of where it was in relation to my shin. It was the exact same as pulling off the floor, and then when I pulled off the floor, it was a lot more comfortable that way. So, if you really want to do rack deadlifts, that's what I suggest. You shouldn't have the bar if you're doing rack deadlifts, the bar should never be below your knees. There's no reason to do that. If you're doing that, you're merely just doing that to boost your ego. And remember what you do. You're in there. You're in the gym to do. You're in there to, as far as I'm concerned, you're in there to increase your deadlift. If you're doing rack deadlift and it's 400 pounds more than your regular deadlift off the floor, like, what's the fucking point of doing that? Do lifts that actually help your actual lift that you're trying to help. I'll go over briefly the squatting and squatting and benching as well. For squats, things that create a deficit would be things like, obviously pause deadlifts, really good. Or sorry, things that create a deficit would be things like pause squats. Squatting to pins is also a really, really good one, because that kind of, it takes into the account the pause squat, but it also allows you to come to a complete stop, and really teaches you how to get out of the hole nice and fast, and increases your confidence with heavier weights as well. Front squats, I mean, they're not technically a deficit, although you can't use as much of a load, but the difference between a front squat and a back squat are varied depending on mainly how much experience you have with front squats. If you're good at front squatting, your front squat might only be, maybe 85 to 95% of your back squat. Whereas if you're like brand new and you've done back squats for a while but never done front squats, it could be like, I've seen as low as like 65%. So make sure that if you do front squats, and I love them, they're a great exercise, that you understand where you're starting from and how much experience you have with that lift. And then as far as for squatting, doing overload training, there's not much outside of using reverse bands on that as well. And I'm sure a lot of people get a lot out of doing reverse bands. The other thing that people like doing are doing walkouts with the squat. I've never actually done them, but again, it's just something that you can do to kind of increase your confidence with a heavier weight, and there's obviously nothing wrong with that. And then when it comes to bench, there's probably the most variation you can do with that. So for creating deficits, it would be things like, you can use those cambered bars, which, I mean, honestly, I've never seen a gym person that has that, but I'm in Canada and the gyms here suck. So using a cambered bar, and then they also have the cambered bar, and they also have the bent ones. And I don't know if those ones are called cambered bars. I can't remember for the life of me what they're called. You can use stuff like that. Those obviously increase your range of motion. If you have no shoulder problems, it's obviously a great idea, and helps your bottom strength obviously quite a lot. And then things like pausing. So if you're competing, obviously you're pausing your benches, and so things like increasing the pauses on those benches would be obviously a great way to have carryover to the regular bench, because it'll teach you how to stay tight longer, increase your confidence off your chest, and the other important thing for me is that it gets you used to the IPF commands, because at least for me, most judging for the bench I find is reasonably standard between federations. I find some of them are really lax, and it looks like a touch and go, but that's neither here nor there. I don't want to get into that. But yeah, like when I train myself and I'm just doing a pause bench, I find usually when I go into the competition, it feels like it's forever that it's paused on my chest. So, doing things like 2, 3, 4 second pauses can be definitely beneficial. That's something that I haven't done that much. I'm going to be adding that into my next training cycle after this current one. So I'm looking forward to that. And then, also benching to pins, also another great one. There's kind of two methods of doing that. One is unracking the bar as you normally would, and then coming down to the pins. I just call that bench to pins. And then there's kind of a rack press, which is where you start with the bar on your chest, or near your chest on the safety pins, and you just press off there. Jeremy Hornsler does those with like 600 pounds. It's absolutely ridiculous. So those are a couple ways to create deficits in the bench. And then for overload bench, obviously things like using the slingshot are awesome. I only have experience with the classic slingshot, and I really like it because, it allows you to overload, but it's nothing crazy. Like if you do like 4 or 5 board presses, etc., you can add like I don't know, hundreds of pounds to your lift. So not crazy about those for raw lifting, but you know, the slingshot might add 5-10% to your bench, and obviously is a great way to get an overload. And then for me, the main reason I like it is it allows me to bench more frequently, and I've always done very well with frequency training, so that's a big reason I like it. And then on top of that are things like board presses. For raw bench, I think one board presses is more than enough. And then another exercise I've been really interested in but haven't tried yet, that Mike Teixeira suggests, is a ply press. So that's basically where you just get a piece of plywood and you put that on your chest instead of a one board. So I mean, it's a very, very small difference, but again, you know, these things where you can just add small differences, I find allow you to get stronger and stronger in the long run. So those would be my main exercises. And then with bench, same thing. You can to create a deficit or overload. You can use bands, and you can use chains. I forgot to add chains and bands from the bottom up as well for squatting and deadlifting. You can do them. Again, I'm not crazy about using bands and chains just because, well, for one thing, I don't have chains to use, and then when I've used bands in the past, they've been, I don't know, I would rather just lift the weight as close to the competition as possible. And I find sometimes the bands can, depending on how you set the bands up, can kind of get you out of the groove of the way you deadlift without them. And so, you know, if you're deadlifting one specific way when you're using bands versus another way when you're not using bands, then it's pretty questionable the amount of carryover you're going to get between them. And then chains, I would love to use chains. The beauty about chains is I don't think it's really going to change your movement patterns, especially for like deadlifting and benching. But I just don't have access to them, so I haven't used them. Much already stamped this in, but you know, the point of assistance exercises isn't to improve your ego. It's not supposed to replace your primary exercise. It's to assist your primary exercise. So, you know, if you want an ego boost, then add 100 pounds to your deadlift, squat, and bench. You know, don't worry about adding 200 pounds to your 2-inch rack deadlift to boost your ego, because you know it's not that important. So yeah, I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please hit the like rating. Feel free to comment. I go through all of them and try to get back to everyone. And if you like these kinds of videos, hit the subscribe button. Got a lot more coming for you. And I look forward to talking to you again very soon. Peace.